Welcome back to Conquering Chaos, a mom's guide to self-care and sanity. I'm your host, Sydney Crow, and today we have the amazing Dr. Luz here from the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome, Dr. Luz. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. As I told you, I have a bit more of a husky voice, getting over a chest cold, but I feel it feels more dignified.
I think your voice sounds stunning today. It's very dignified. So I'm glad that you were able to make it on. You are a life and parenting coach, which I think is just phenomenal. We were sharing a little bit prior to our episode kicking off here. And you have a really holistic approach to parenting. So why don't you fill the listeners in on what your practice is all about and how you have used positive psychology, trauma therapy, child development, and your 20 years in the education system to really build a 360-degree view on your practice now.
I love that you use the term 360-degree view because that is what I feel is missing in parenting. I had my kids in 1995 and 1997. And at that point, there was like the one book. There was what to expect, right? And my breakdown came in 1998 when I had my son. It took me 7 minutes to get my kids out of car seats and into an umbrella stroller and baby Bjorn at the time. And I just had this moment of like, how am I going to do this?
Mm.
I need to raise two fully functional humans when I am not a fully functional human. And all of the books were about their development and their needs, but not what I needed to do in order to become the parent I needed. So it was either fake it till you make it or do something different. And I decided to do something different. And I told you, I think the biggest gift for me was that I birthed myself. I was a very difficult child by all accounts. You can see it in my report cards on all the comments, like all the veiled comments, like high spirited,
She
very
talks too
imaginative.
much.
Yeah, right. Friendly with everyone. So I had all of those report cards. I heard all the stories from my aunts and uncles and my grandparents. So I knew I was a difficult child and I birthed myself. So there was this moment of oh, I need to raise this child. And I have a strong-willed human being in front of me. So what am I going to do? Do I do what I experienced, which, let's face it, worked to a point, right? I am a doctor. I went all the way through graduate school. I went to UC Berkeley. So technically, everything my parents did worked, right? Worked, quote unquote. But did it work? Was I the person that I needed to be? So I went on this journey of personal development to figure out what I needed in order to be the kind of person, because I feel like you can't tell your children, and I see this a lot where parents say, do this, but they're not doing it themselves. And so it creates this sense of distrust, not because the parents aren't doing what they need to, they're doing what they think they need to, but they're not really taking it in for themselves. And I see parenting as this amazing opportunity to do for ourselves what was not done for us. So
Mhm.
that's what I'm talking about, the 360-degree view. It's about caring and healing ourselves from whatever little t trauma or big T trauma occurred in our childhoods, becoming that person that we needed to be, like really becoming, not just like faking it, not just pretending, but really taking it in and healing so that we can role model what it means to be a whole human. And I think a lot of us get into this parenting thing and we have this idea of what we need to be, but our kids know. And how do we know that? Because we knew. Every person listening to this podcast had a moment. They were at between 7 and 10, when they looked at their parents and they went, I don't think you know everything. Am I
Mm.
right? Like, did you have that moment where you were
Yeah.
like, really, mom? I don't think you really know what you're. And so my thing was all about like being transparent about that. saying like, I actually don't know. Let's find out together. Let's create a team together. Let's be vulnerable together. Let's grow together. So when I say 360-degree view, I'm coaching parents to be their best selves, to heal from their whatever they experienced in their childhoods, and then helping them develop these families where their children are free to be their full authentic selves. Because
Yes.
we spend a lot of time in our adulthood reclaiming our authentic selves. And I feel like we can create these families from the get-go, from the beginning. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I did the perfect job, but my kids know that. Do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
not like I pretended to be perfect and no, I was like, I'm not perfect at this. I'm going to screw up a bunch and I'm going to say I'm sorry. I'm going to tell you when I screwed up. We're going to heal through anything that happens. We're just going to be like actual human beings, which I
Yes.
think is the key, right? Not
Yeah.
to be a human doing, but to be a human being.
Wow. I mean, that's powerful. And I think it's so important to teach them accountability, right? No human is perfect. There isn't a single human on this planet that is, from birth till death, does everything absolutely perfectly. And so being able to exemplify that you can say sorry, that you're not
Mhm.
perfect, you're teaching that from the ground up, it's really going to help create this next generation of people that can do that from the beginning
Yeah.
and also know who they are, right? You touched on something where it was like you had to kind of relearn who you were, right, in
Mhm.
your adult life. And if we can teach them that and teach them that intuition and teach them how they're just so in tune with themselves from the get-go, they're not going to get to 20 and have to relearn how to be an adult or who they are or how to check
Yeah.
right? So I think that's a
Yeah.
really powerful piece that you touched on there too.
Yeah, and I think that's the gift of having your children in your 20s. And I think that every age that we have our children is the right age. For me, it happened to be in my 20s. But there's that moment in your 20s when you're like, do I actually like Rocky Road ice cream? Or did I just like take that with me? Like, what actually is my favorite color, right? Where you realize that you've taken on so much from your parents, from your siblings, from your family, from your culture of things that you're supposed to be. And then you ask yourself, do I actually like that? Do I want to do that? Do I want to carry that forward?
Yes, absolutely. So how did that play a role in, your education career as a principal?
Yeah.
You said that you were for a little while there as well. I mean, obviously your kids are grown and I'm assuming maybe out of the house.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
so you're
Yeah.
you're at a whole different stage of life right now than I am. So fill me in on how that played a role through your career and now as an empty nester.
Yeah. So all of this is like, when you become a teacher, you say to the world, I am a lifelong learner. So the world says to you, great, let's give you all the things to learn, right? So what has carried on throughout my life has been two things. I am a lifelong learner and I'm imperfect, and that's enough. And
Wow.
so because of that, it frees me up, right? Once I realized that as a church teacher, like I actually don't know everything, it freed me up from everything because
Mm,
I didn't have to know it. And I could discover together with the children in my class. And that's a wonderful place to be. I spent a whole spring just following kids as they learned about bees. We did a whole thing, like 3 months on bees, which ended up in a musical because they wanted to put on a musical. So that's the kind of thing that opens up for you if you're not a slave to like what is supposed to be or what is supposed to be based on whatever system that you happen to be in. It also did the same thing. It also freed me up as a principal because when I understood I didn't have all the answers, it freed me up to find the answers with them. And that happens because of my approach to parenting. Like, I actually don't know everything about you. Guess what, children? I don't. Like, you left my body and that was it. I think we all have this moment when Sophia was like a few days old. I realized like, oh my goodness, I know nothing about her
mm,
and I don't know what she's thinking. and she came out of my body. And I felt like I didn't even, I thought like she was a part of me, but they're not. They're like fully formed humans that have kind of a through line. There are parts of their personalities that will stay the same. And I can say that with real and true authority because my children are now 28 and 25. And there are through lines. There are things that are them and have been them. And if I had tried to mold them in a different way, they would be these adults that were like, maybe it's not good to question authority. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? My daughter, that's been her through line. She's a reality questioning life form. And that's okay because that's what we need in this world. We need critical thinkers. We need people to say, like, hey, here's this rule. Actually, is this what we need right now? Is there something that we can do to fix the system? And that's who she is. She looks at systems and she, questions them. And I think that's great because it helps. And my son is somebody who's always been very in tune with his own emotions and the emotions of others. And as well as many of your listeners do, that that is not the character of what we see as male in
Mhm.
this. I'm coming to you from the San Francisco Bay Area, from the US. So in a US context, being sensitive and knowing your emotions and showing your emotions is still not something that's completely accepted by the culture. And
That's
I
right.
could have gone that way, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I chose not to because I was like, here's this really sensitive person who will be an excellent person in any relationship, be it friend, be it mentor, be it, be it father, husband, whatever. This is a strength, and I'm not going to try to fit him into a mold. And all of that comes from like me saying, I don't know who you are. I want to find out who that is.
That's amazing. And you
Hmm.
mentioned like a title that you gave your daughter there that she questions authority. Where does
Yeah.
that come from?
That
Is that
comes from her actual spirit and being. I mean, she did that from the beginning.
okay?
Like she did it just from the beginning. I remember like literally she was my parents had left. It was like day 3 and I was like, I'm feeling solid. I'm like, I've washed her, I bathed her, I put on her diaper on her own, I figured out breastfeeding. I'm rocking this. And my parents left the driveway in the morning. I'm waving, like, I got this, mom and dad. I'm 24. I'm like, I totally have it. And at 2 p.m., she was just, so this is like 6 hours, like 4 hours later, and she was completely inconsolable.
Oh
And I
no.
did all the things. I'm like, is she wet? Is she hungry? Is she, the basic, she was completely inconsolable. And I'm doing everything. And she like literally looked at me like, with her sweet little 3-day-old face and looked at me like, I don't think you know what you're doing, you know?
Just
And
like nailed it.
like, what's going on here? Because I feel like this isn't correct. And I mean, it was to me, it was like, okay, so for real, I know that there is not baby side eye as like one of the things that you can look through in the what to expect book. I'm like, so there's nothing around like baby side eye or your child has figured out you don't know what the heck you're doing. So, at that point, I mean, I knew like from the get, she was smart, she was questioning, and that's a good thing. It's a really good thing to be, especially as a female, because there's a lot of things that are put onto us. And to question authority is a really strong thing. So she could have experienced what I experienced, which was like this whole molding thing,
Yeah.
make her into what she's supposed to be in this world, or somehow keep that intact while keeping my sanity intact too, right? Because I
Yeah.
could easily gone the other way and just been like, okay, guess you're raising yourself because I don't know how to raise you. But I realized there had to be boundaries for her and also an appreciation of her kind of natural inclination to test boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Because I can't just let her run in the street. I can't just let her have ice cream all the time, right?
Despite
I
whatever you did.
Right, exactly. Like I could just like lean into that, like, oh, she's strong-willed, I can't do anything about it. And I honestly, I've seen that, Sydney. It's really scary, right? We see that out in the world where people don't want their children to be upset. And one of the things I've always told parents and teachers is like, actually, that's not on your job description. There's nowhere in your job description that says, my children will like me all the time.
Right.
There's nothing in your job description that says my children will be my best bud. That is not how it goes. And it doesn't work. But there's
Yeah.
also another way. You also don't have to be this like super controlling, kind of top down person either. There's this like mutual respect sweet spot that we can inhabit.
So raising your son and your daughter to be the best that they can be, you growing alongside them as you birthed yourself, you said, what
Yep.
are 3 to 5 tips that you would give for your listeners that you say are like, these are the critical steps that you have to embody to make that happen so that you can find
Yeah. So, number one, embrace vulnerability and truth telling. And what I mean by that is to say, although it's scary, I'm wrong or I made a mistake. Those are
Mm,
things that are really important for children to hear because what they need to know is that failure is an option.
mm,
And
mhm.
two, that you can come back from making a mistake. So, how else are they going to learn that unless they learn that from you? Like, how else are they going to know it's okay to screw up unless you say, I screwed up, let's move forward? How else are they going to know that it's okay to fail unless they see from you, like, man, I really failed at this thing and I'm going to keep going or, I'm going to make a different choice, right? So, number one, complete radical vulnerability and honesty. Not to the point where you're like oversharing, right? But just in the things that really impact them.
Yeah.
Number two is that self-care is not selfish.
Mhm.
And there's a lot out there right now about self-care, but it's not bubble baths and it's not getting a massage. It is about taking intentional time out to connect with yourself. So I coach my parents to have non-negotiable time. And I'm not talking about 90 minutes, 2 hours. I'm talking about whatever makes the most sense, but that you put a line, you put like a real bold line around that time. And it happens in the morning so that you can calibrate. You can say, like, this is how I want my day to go. And then a time at the end of the day to just do a quick review. And this can be as little as 5 minutes. It can be over coffee in the morning and just sitting and relaxing in bed before bed. But that non-negotiable me time is self-care to reconnect and to make sure that you're kind of you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah.
So radical vulnerability and honesty, self-care is not selfish, and be willing to be a lifelong learner
Okay.
because
Yeah.
our kids are going to change. Like I said, there is a through line in their personalities. That's true, but be willing to keep learning about each other. And that's actually for every relationship, right? For those of us who are parenting with a partner, for those of us who are parenting without a partner and want to be in a relationship, people are not static beings. We're always evolving, and that's true for our children too. So always be willing to learn something new about that person.
Mm.
Because I think we've all been there where people have said like, oh, Dr. Luz is this kind of person. It's like, no, actually, I grew since the last time you saw me. So no, I'm a little bit different. So I think that lifelong learner thing is super important.
Yeah, and very powerful to keep strengthening those relationships, right? Because
Yes. Yeah.
there's two parties in every relationship that are should always be learning and growing in their own pace.
Yeah.
Not always going to be on the same level, right? So I think it's really powerful when you can keep that connection going and keep that, that environment where you're willing to learn about them. I think that's
Yeah.
that goes for friendships and partners and all sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. So thank you so much for being here today. Is there any last piece of advice that you'd love to share with the listeners?
Yeah. Just, I want to hit hard again the fact that you have to take time to connect to yourself,
Mm.
to heal yourself so that you can be the person. It's not going to happen on its own.
No, no,
This
it
is,
really,
yeah.
yeah, you really have to emulate who you want to be, right?
Hmm.
Learning about that, healing that from the inside. It is an internal job. I mean, even just going through my own experience, I started very much was like fit into that box. And so into my adult life was seeking external validation. And then
Exactly.
until I started to really do the inner work that I was like, oh, I can actually do these things. I just need to start looking in here instead of, out.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
thank you again for being here today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. You guys, we will make sure that you know how to contact Dr. Luz in all of the show notes. Thank you guys for tuning into today's episode where we help you conquer the chaos one day at a time.